Hey, Global CE Day. This is Tom Judd from CED. I had the privilege of interviewing this morning our board treasurer and our friend and our colleague, Dr. Leandro Pecchia, from professor at the University of Warwick there in UK, but due to COVID, hanging out at home in Italy. Leandro, how you doing today?
Hi, Tom. I'm doing very well, thank you. Thank you for this invitation. It's a big pleasure.
Well, tell us a little bit about the role that you have there at the university.
Yeah, I'm a professor of biomedical engineering, a reader, and here I am the director of the biomedical engineering master, which is strongly oriented towards clinical engineering. One of our main modules is about clinical engineering, and many of our students, they do their project in this field.
Maybe a little later I'll ask you about some of those projects, because I know a lot of the great young clinical engineers around the world are coming out of your program, so that's very cool. But I know you have particularly a heart for the work of health technology in Europe as well as in Africa, and that's really been heightened during the COVID crisis. Can you share a little bit about those activities?
Indeed, Tom, indeed. Yeah, we spend all our time in my research group, and we are pretty, there are several people in my group now, and we work focusing on different aspects of healthcare technologies. And when it comes to Europe, we are working with several colleagues and industries and institutions in Europe in order to improve and the effectiveness and safety of medical devices in all over Europe. For instance, now the latest project we won is about exploring how robots can increase hospital effectiveness and cost effectiveness in future. Probably there are things that we are doing now physically, which probably in future will be done by robots. And we have been granted this 13 million euro project in order to explore how this can be done as soon as possible. That's just an exemplar. The other activity that we mainly do with European projects, for instance, the Gatekeeper is a 24 million euro project that we wrote with Giuseppe Fico Madrid last year. And in this case, we are using the same technologies, Internet of Things, artificial intelligence, but for home monitoring now, for later life. So that's what we do in this field. That's in Europe.
Well, hey, I'm thinking about, this is the month, of course, where we're all submitting abstracts for our next Congress in Rome. And gosh, you guys can only have, what, 5-10 abstracts in home care, brother? That'll be great.
I don't know if this year will be 10, but this morning I've reviewed few with my colleagues. You will see the work, for instance, that Davide Piaggio and Alessia Macro are doing in Africa now, with scholars from Africa, Professor Medeniu and Dr. Roland Oussano. And for instance, the work they will present is about how can we use 3D printing and circular economy for locally manufacturing medical devices, which otherwise are not available. So Davide will show his last use case, which is about an intrauterine balloon tamponade, which is possible to be 3D printed in situ using reutilizing bottle plastics, for instance. So that's an exemplar. But there is more than that. We are working on a jaundice therapy vest for newborn, which is just using blue light, which is obviously not dangerous. And jaundice in sub-Saharan Africa is a huge problem for several reasons. We are now studying with Katie Stokes and Rosanna Castaldo, put in my group, how to use artificial intelligence to early detect pneumonia. Pneumonia is a burden. It's huge in Africa, but COVID demonstrated that it's still a problem also for high-income countries. So in a sense, what we are doing in Africa, it's also relevant for higher income countries when they are in a moment of crisis. For instance, this COVID has created a circumstance which is low resource setting, this time in the States as well as in Europe. So many of those methods and tools that we have been developing in the past few years proved to be effective also for Europe during crisis, which is important.
I know you called out the work in Benin. Just say a couple more words about that, because you mentioned a couple of collaborators' names, I believe.
Professor Medeniu is the professor of biomedical engineering in Benin. And we are doing several things together, Tom. For instance, the last work we did together was helping them to design and use a system to manage medical devices in hospitals. And before this project, they were using pen and paper, and now they have an electronic repository for managing medical devices, which is not trivial. This is in French because Benin is obviously a Francophone country, but it's of yesterday in the news that they are engaging now with colleagues from Ghana, where actually they speak English, in order to translate this software, which they did, in English, so this can be used horizontally within the other countries, because obviously they have similar problems, although in a different context. That's an exemplar. Then what else are we doing with them? We are testing medical location, trying to gather numbers about how safe they are, how effective they can be, because we have a huge problem here. If I have a near miss, not to say a mistake or an error or a fault with a medical device in Europe or in the state, I know that I have to report it. I know how to do it. FDA is a very nice repository. In Africa, there is nothing like that. So probably whatever we know about fault of medical devices in Africa is not as accurate as we think it is, because simply there is not in place a system to collect this information. So my early career collaborators, Oronti Busola, Davide Piaggio, with Licia Di Pietro, a nice visiting fellow from Pisa. They have been in several African countries measuring, for instance, electric safety in surgical theaters. Again, during COVID time, this has been a little bit more complicated, but they did a great job, and you have seen a couple of those publications, and you will see more to the Congress, as you mentioned before.
You know, we can measure how people do by the outcomes, but in your case, by the people you produce. And I just want to give a call out. You're producing some incredible young clinical engineers, and hey, they were the winners of several of the awards in Rome for their papers and their work in several of the categories. You know, you mentioned David, I know Martina. In fact, because of their great work in Rome, you know, we've invited them to be on the Scientific and Student Papers Committee for Orlando. So keep up the good work. And I know, and Bussola, you also mentioned, maybe talk a little bit more about this incredible group of young engineers.
Very lucky, Tom. I'm very, very, very lucky. So whatever I do, it's because I stand on the shoulder of those giants, which are my colleagues and collaborators. And they are very motivated. They work very well together. They help each other. So they created an environment in which they are flourishing. You mentioned it already, Martina, Davide, Bussola, but obviously there are other folks. Alessia, she's a philosopher by background with a PhD in bioethics. And now she's with us because also introducing medical devices in Africa has some ethical implications that we need to learn how to consider and fight. And then there is Rossana. She's the senior in the lab, and she's very experienced in artificial intelligence. There is Salman. He just joined us in May. He's an expert of deep learning, because that's another area which is growing in the lab. But then there is Carlo. Carlo is an health economist, because you cannot do anything in our field if you don't know exactly what is the economical impact and how to cover the health technology assessment angle. Martina is also an expert in that, but she's a biomedical engineer. Carlo is working in that, doing the PhD in our lab, but he's an health economist, so he's a multidisciplinary lab. There is Tom. Tom is a wonderful mathematician from Hong Kong. He's applying his wonderful math to model human behaviors, because it doesn't matter what we give as a target or what we think is happening, but then you have to know what's really going on. And Tim is working on how to model human behavior in a way that then you can use this in order to improve the process, let me say, not just the device. So certainly I forgot someone. Katie Stokes, she already started, and I mentioned it before, artificial intelligence for pneumonia.
We give you forgiveness ahead because you've done such a great job of painting the picture of your great team. Let's close with, well, we want to hear your encouragement about Global CE Day, but you know, you're the master networker. You know, you're an officer in many organizations. You're the master leverager, because you get all these grants to do the great work, but you show us how to, you know, a small investment on our part gets a huge impact. So any closing thoughts for the Global CE Day crowd?
Guys, let's work together. There is nothing that we can do alone. So all my work is based on my network of friendship and collaboration within my group, as I mentioned it, but then in Europe with, I think in those projects, we have more than 67 different partners in Europe. We work with them, I don't want to say daily, but regularly. And then when I think to Africa, we have our network, which is going from Benin to South Africa to Mozambique to several sub-Saharan African countries. And as you mentioned, I have a little role also in the IUPS, which is the Global Federation of Medical Engineering, Biomedical Engineering, and Medical Physics. What I learned by this experience is that none of us can do anything alone. So we have to work together, and this clinical engineering division is giving a great exemplar also in those difficult times with COVID, demonstrating the fact that working together, we can achieve much more. And that's your merit, Tom. I want to thank you for that.
Thank you so much for your time today, Leandro.